After more than 40 years on this bench, I've learned that fear has a sound. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's a shaky breath. Sometimes it's silence. And sometimes it's the quiet sob of someone trying very hard not to cry while standing in front of a judge. That morning started like most mornings do for me. I woke up early, before the house stirred. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of strong black coffee, letting the quiet settle around me. My wife always says I think too much in the mornings. She's probably right, but those moments give me time to prepare myself for the people I'm about to meet. By 8:15, I was walking into the courthouse, nodding to the officers at the door, hearing the familiar echo of footsteps in the hallway. I've walked those halls thousands of times. The building hasn't changed much, but the people who walk into it do, every single day. In my chambers, Christina had already laid out the files. She knows my routine better than anyone. Neat stacks, notes ready, coffee exactly the way I like it. After all these years, we work together almost without speaking. I glanced through the docket. Traffic violations, missed appearances, minor offenses, nothing unusual on paper. But I've learned never to trust paper alone. Paper doesn't show nerves. It doesn't show fear. It doesn't show what someone went through just to get out of bed that morning. When I took my seat on the bench and looked out over my courtroom, I did what I always do. I looked at faces, not charges. I saw people sitting stiffly, gripping paperwork. I saw crossed arms. I saw anxious eyes. Courtrooms do that to people, even the toughest ones. The morning moved along steadily, case after case, some people defensive, some apologetic, some barely listening. I asked questions. I ruled. I listened. Then Christina called the next name, and the moment I looked up, I felt something change. I watched a young woman stand up slowly from the bench. She hesitated for just a second, like she wasn't sure her legs would cooperate. She walked toward the podium carefully, each step measured. Her hands were trembling and she kept wiping them on her pants like she was trying to steady herself. I could see it immediately. She was terrified. I asked her to state her name. Her voice was soft, barely steady. When she spoke, it wavered, and she cleared her throat quickly, embarrassed. I've seen that before. That's someone trying very hard not to break down. I explained why she was there, a traffic matter, simple on paper. But as I spoke, I noticed her breathing get faster. Her eyes filled with tears. She was fighting back with everything she had. She nodded as if she understood, but her body was telling a different story. I stopped mid-sentence. I've learned something important over the years. When someone is overwhelmed, information doesn't land. You can keep talking, but they won't hear you. So instead of continuing, I leaned forward slightly and asked her a simple question. I asked her if she was all right. That was all it took. Her lips trembled. Her eyes filled. She shook her head just once, and then the tears came, quiet at first, then heavier. She apologized immediately, saying she didn't mean to cry. She said she was sorry for wasting time. I told her to stop, gently. I told her she wasn't wasting anyone's time. I told her to take a breath. My courtroom went silent. No one moved. Everyone felt it. I asked her what was going on. She tried to speak, but her words tangled. She wiped her face again, embarrassed, and said she was nervous, very nervous. She said she had never been in court before. She said she hadn't slept the night before. She said she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I listened. She told me she had been pulled over weeks earlier. She said she hadn't meant to do anything wrong. She said she had tried to follow the rules, but everything in her life felt like it was happening all at once. Work pressure, family stress, financial worry. Standing there, she said, felt like the breaking point. Her hands were shaking now, not dramatically, subtly, the kind of shaking people don't notice unless they're paying attention. I was paying attention. I've seen arrogance in my courtroom. I've seen anger. I've seen entitlement. But what stood in front of me that morning was pure fear. And fear doesn't need punishment. It needs reassurance. I took off my glasses and set them on the bench. I do that when I want someone to know I'm speaking to them, not at them. I looked at her and asked her one more question. I asked her if she knew why she was so scared. She paused. Then she said something honest. She said she always felt like she messed things up. She said she was afraid of authority. She said being there made her feel small, like a child who was about to be scolded. That hit me. I thought about how many people walk into court carrying old fears that have nothing to do with the charge, past experiences, past voices, past shame. Authority can bring all of that rushing back. I told her something calmly. I told her she wasn't in trouble for being nervous. I told her she wasn't in trouble for being human. And then I said something I don't often say in a courtroom. I told her to look at me. She did, reluctantly, eyes still wet. And then I said one word. I said, smile. She froze. For a moment I thought I might have confused her. She looked at me like she wasn't sure she heard correctly. The room stayed silent. Even Christina glanced up. I told her again, gently. I said, just smile. Her lips twitched, not a full smile, just the smallest one. The kind people make when they don't quite believe they're allowed to feel okay. And in that moment, something shifted. I could see it in her shoulders. They dropped slightly. Her breathing slowed. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. That single word did something no ruling ever could. I hadn't ruled yet. I hadn't even addressed the charge. But I already knew this case wasn't about a traffic violation. It was about someone who needed to be reminded that court doesn't have to be terrifying, that authority doesn't always mean anger, and that sometimes kindness is the most powerful thing you can offer. And that's where this story truly began. When I said that word smile, I wasn't trying to be clever. I wasn't trying to lighten the mood for the room. I said it because I could see how tightly she was wound, how fear had taken control of her body. Sometimes the mind follows the body, not the other way around. A small shift can open a door. She looked at me again, still unsure. I could tell she was wondering if she was allowed to smile in a courtroom. That thought alone told me how much pressure she was under. I nodded at her just slightly, letting her know it was okay. That tiny smile stayed on her face for a second longer this time. Not forced, not fake, just present. And when it happened, I saw something else too. Her eyes met mine without darting away. That's when I knew she was ready to speak. I asked her to take her time and explain what had happened. I didn't rush her. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. She told me she had been driving to work when she was pulled over. She said she hadn't realized her registration had expired. She said money had been tight and she kept putting it off, telling herself she'd take care of it next paycheck. Then life kept happening, one thing after another. As she spoke, her voice steadied. The tears didn't stop completely, but they slowed. She was no longer fighting them. She was explaining. That's a big difference. I asked her where she worked. She told me she worked long hours. She said she was trying to save money. She said she helped support her family when she could. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was giving context. Context matters. I could feel the courtroom leaning in. People do that when something real is happening. This wasn't a performance. This was a person trying to hold herself together. I asked her if she had ever been in trouble before. She shook her head quickly. She said no. She said she always tried to follow the rules. That line came out fast, like she needed me to believe her. I believed her. I've seen people lie in my courtroom. I've heard every excuse you can imagine. This wasn't that. This was someone overwhelmed, not irresponsible. There's a difference, and it's an important one. I leaned back slightly and looked at the file again. The violation was straightforward. The fine was clear. The law gave me options, but the law also gives judges discretion for a reason. Discretion exists to serve justice, not ego. I asked her one more question. I asked her why this moment scared her so much. Not the ticket, not the fine. This moment. She swallowed hard before answering. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said she felt like she was always one mistake away from everything falling apart. She said standing there felt like proof that she was failing. When she said that, her voice broke again, but she didn't look away. That kind of honesty takes courage. I thought about how many people live with that feeling every day, that they're barely holding things together, that one letter in the mail, one unexpected stop, one courtroom appearance might confirm their worst fears about themselves. I told her something gently. I told her that one mistake does not define a person. I told her that being nervous doesn't mean she's weak, it means she cares. I could see her processing that. People don't hear that often enough. I told her that court can feel intimidating, especially if you've never been there before. I told her that my job wasn't to scare her. My job was to be fair. I told her fairness includes understanding. She nodded slowly. Her hands were no longer shaking. At that moment, I noticed something else. She was standing differently now, straighter, still nervous but grounded. Fear had loosened just enough for clarity to step in. I made my decision, but before saying it, I wanted to do something more important. I wanted to change how she would remember this day. I told her that sometimes when people are nervous, their body holds on to that fear even when their mind knows they're okay. I told her that smiling, even briefly, can remind the body that it's safe, that it's allowed to breathe. I asked her to smile again. This time she did. A real one, small but genuine. And when she smiled, something remarkable happened. The tension in the room softened. Even people in the gallery smiled back without realizing it. That's the power of human connection. It doesn't announce itself. It just happens. I told her she was doing fine. I told her she hadn't embarrassed herself. I told her she hadn't wasted anyone's time. I told her she had done exactly what she was supposed to do. She showed up, she explained, she took responsibility. I could see relief spreading across her face, like a weight being lifted she didn't know she was carrying. Then I addressed the charge. I told her that the purpose of traffic laws is safety, not punishment. I told her that the court's goal is compliance, not fear. I told her I wanted to make sure she left that courtroom better than she entered it. I dismissed the charge. For a moment she didn't react. Her eyes widened slightly, like she wasn't sure she heard me correctly. Then she exhaled, a long breath she'd been holding in for who knows how long. Her hand went to her mouth. Tears came again, but these were different. These weren't fear tears. These were release tears. She thanked me, but I stopped her gently. I told her she didn't need to thank me. I told her she needed to remember how she felt in that moment, steadier, stronger, capable. I told her to carry that feeling with her the next time she felt overwhelmed. I told her to remind herself that she can handle difficult moments even when they scare her. Before she left, I said one more thing. I told her that the world can be heavy sometimes, but she didn't have to carry it all at once. I told her to take things one step at a time. She nodded, wiped her face, and walked away from the podium. And as she did, I noticed something important. She was still smiling, not because everything in her life was suddenly perfect, but because someone in authority had seen her fear and chosen kindness instead of judgment. As Christina called the next case, I sat back and reflected. These are the moments people remember. Not the fine amounts, not the legal language, the way they were treated when they were vulnerable. And I knew this story wasn't finished yet, because kindness doesn't stop at the bench. It follows people back into their lives. After she walked away from the podium, I noticed the way the room felt different. Courtrooms are sensitive places. Emotion lingers in the air. And that small moment, that single word, had shifted something. People weren't as stiff anymore. They weren't gripping their papers as tightly. It was subtle, but it was real. Christina called the next case and court moved on. But my eyes kept drifting back to the gallery, to where that young woman had returned to her seat. She sat differently now. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. She was still there, still listening, but no longer bracing herself for impact. I've learned that when fear releases its grip, clarity steps in. That's what I saw in her. As the morning continued, I heard stories that echoed the same theme in different ways. People explaining themselves nervously. People apologizing for things they didn't need to apologize for. People expecting the worst before it even arrived. Authority does that to people, especially when they've never stood in front of it before. During a short break, Christina leaned over and said quietly that the young woman had asked if she could stay and watch the rest of the session. That caught my attention. Most people want to leave court as quickly as possible. Wanting to stay meant something had changed. I nodded and told Christina that was fine. I looked out and saw her sitting attentively, watching each case. She wasn't anxious anymore. She was curious. That's a big shift. Watching her sit there reminded me of something important. When people feel safe, they learn. When they feel judged, they shut down. That's true in court, and it's true in life. As I listened to other cases, I thought about the power of tone. The law is the same whether you shout it or speak it calmly, but the impact is entirely different. People remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you decided. At one point, a young man stood before me, clearly agitated. His case involved a traffic matter, too. He came in defensive, arms crossed, jaw tight. Instead of matching his energy, I lowered mine. I asked him simple questions. I listened. Slowly, his posture softened. I noticed the young woman watching closely. She leaned forward slightly, like she was studying the exchange. I realized she was learning something important. That authority doesn't have to be confrontational. That calm can exist even in difficult moments. When court recessed for lunch, I returned to my chambers and sat quietly. I thought about how often people walk into intimidating spaces, already convinced they don't belong, already convinced they'll be dismissed. One small moment of kindness can rewrite that script. That afternoon, when court resumed, the young woman was still there. Toward the end of the session, she stood up hesitantly and approached Christina. I watched from the bench as Christina listened and nodded. When there was a pause, Christina leaned toward me and asked if I would mind if the young woman said something briefly. I nodded. She approached the podium again, this time with less hesitation. She apologized for interrupting and said she just wanted to say thank you properly. She said she hadn't expected to be treated with patience. She said she had been scared for days leading up to court. She told me something that stayed with me. She said when I told her to smile, it felt like permission to relax for the first time in weeks. She said she didn't realize how tense she had been until that moment. I told her something honestly. I told her fear is heavy, and it sneaks up on people. I told her she did nothing wrong by feeling overwhelmed. I told her that learning how to steady yourself in moments like that is a skill, and she had just practiced it. She nodded, eyes bright, not with tears this time, but with understanding. Before she left, I told her to remember that feeling. I told her the next time life feels like it's closing in, she should pause, breathe, and remind herself she's capable. I told her she handled herself well. She thanked me again and returned to her seat. A few minutes later, court adjourned for the day. As people filed out, I noticed her lingering near the door. When she finally left, she turned back briefly, caught my eye, and smiled again. That wasn't fear anymore. That was confidence, however small. After everyone was gone, I sat alone in the courtroom for a moment. I do that when something stays with me. I thought about how rarely people in authority say something simple and human, and how powerful it can be when they do. On my drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I drove in silence, replaying the day in my head. I thought about how many people walk into court expecting to be shamed, and how different their experience could be if they were met with calm instead. At home, my wife asked me how my day had been. I told her about the young woman. I told her about the tears, the fear, the smile. She listened carefully, then said something I've never forgotten. She said sometimes people don't need advice or solutions. They need reassurance that they're not failing. I nodded. She was right. That night, I thought about how authority shapes memories. For that young woman, court could have been a traumatic story she told for years. Instead, it became something else, a moment where fear was met with kindness. And I knew this story wasn't finished yet, because when someone leaves a place of authority feeling stronger instead of smaller, it changes how they face the world next. And I had a feeling I was going to see that change play out. The days after that courtroom moment stayed with me, not because of the ruling, but because of the transformation I witnessed in real time. Fear doesn't disappear instantly, but when it loosens its grip, something else can take its place. Confidence doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, you're going to be okay. A week later, I saw her name again, not on the docket. On a note Christina handed me during a break. The young woman had called the clerk's office, not with a problem, not with confusion. She just wanted to make sure the paperwork from her case was finalized correctly. That detail told me everything. She wasn't avoiding responsibility. She wasn't running from the system. She was engaging with it calmly. That's growth. I asked Christina to tell her everything was in order. As I handed the note back, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. These are the moments judges don't often talk about. Quiet follow-through, quiet confidence, quiet strength. That same day, another nervous driver stood before me, a young man this time. His hand shook as he spoke. His voice cracked when he tried to explain himself. I saw the same fear I had seen in her, and without even thinking about it, I slowed everything down again. I asked him to breathe. I told him he wasn't in trouble for being nervous. I told him to look up, and I watched the same shift happen. Not because of the law, but because of tone. I realized something then. Kindness is not a one-time act. It's a habit, and habits shape environments. As the weeks passed, I found myself thinking about that word again. Smile. Such a simple word. It didn't dismiss her fear. It didn't minimize her situation. It acknowledged her humanity first. It told her she was safe enough to exist in that space. I remembered my own early days, standing in intimidating rooms trying to prove I belonged. Everyone has moments where they feel small. The difference is whether someone notices. One afternoon, as court was ending, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't involved in any case. She was sitting quietly in the gallery. I recognized her immediately. She looked more relaxed than the first day, still reserved but comfortable. During a pause, I asked Christina why she was there. Christina told me she had asked if she could observe court. She said she wanted to understand how it worked. That caught my attention. Fear had turned into curiosity. After court adjourned, she approached the bench carefully. She thanked me again, but this time her voice was steady. She told me she had gone back to work that day feeling lighter. She said she smiled at people without realizing it. She said it surprised her. I told her something honest. I told her that confidence often follows action, not the other way around. You don't wait to feel brave. You take a small step and bravery follows. She nodded thoughtfully. She said she had always thought confident people were born that way. I smiled and told her that confidence is learned, usually through moments where fear doesn't win. Before she left, she told me something that stayed with me. She said she had been pulled over before, years earlier, and the experience had left her shaken for days. This time felt different. This time, she said, she felt respected. That difference mattered. After she left, I sat quietly for a moment, thinking about how many people carry old fears from past experiences with authority. One harsh moment can echo for years. One kind moment can interrupt that echo. At home that evening, my wife and I talked again about the case. She said it was remarkable how one word could change a day. I told her it wasn't the word alone. It was the intention behind it. People feel intention even when they don't realize it. As the months passed, I noticed something else. People in my courtroom were calmer, not always happy, not always relieved, but calmer. They spoke more clearly. They listened more closely. Respect invites respect. One morning, I received a short handwritten note forwarded from the clerk's office. It was from her, just a few lines. She wrote that she had renewed her registration, paid attention to deadlines, and felt more in control of her life. She wrote that court had taught her something she didn't expect. She wrote that being treated kindly helped her treat herself kindly. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. That drawer holds reminders of responsibility, not success, moments where words mattered. I thought about how often people confuse authority with harshness. True authority doesn't need to raise its voice. It needs to create stability. I also thought about how easily that day could have gone another way. If I had rushed, if I had spoken sharply, if I had ignored her fear, she would have left confirmed in her worst beliefs about herself. Instead, she left smiling. That realization stayed with me, not as pride, but as obligation. Because when you see how much impact a small moment can have, you can't unsee it. As I continued my work on the bench, I carried that lesson with me. Every nervous face, every shaky voice, every hesitant explanation, they all deserve patience. And I knew this story wasn't finished yet, because kindness doesn't just change a day. Sometimes it changes a direction. As more time passed, I began to see the deeper effect that one moment of kindness can have when it reaches someone at the right time. That young woman wasn't just calmer in court. She had begun to carry herself differently, and I noticed it without even trying to. One morning, several weeks later, Christina mentioned that someone was waiting in the hallway before court began. She said they weren't scheduled for any case. They just wanted to say hello if they could. When she told me the name, I recognized it immediately. It was her. She stood near the doorway when I stepped out briefly, hands folded in front of her, no fear in her posture this time. Just respect, just calm. She smiled first, not because she was told to, because it felt natural. She told me she didn't want to interrupt court. She just wanted to thank me again and let me know she was doing well. She said that after that day, something shifted inside her. She said she stopped assuming the worst in every situation. She told me she had started speaking up at work instead of shrinking back. She said she no longer panicked when something went wrong. She said she remembered my voice telling her to breathe, to smile, to slow down. Hearing that humbled me. Judges don't often get to see what happens after people leave the courtroom. We make decisions and move on, but sometimes when you're lucky, someone comes back to tell you the rest of the story. She told me something else that surprised me. She said that before that day, she avoided anything that involved authority. She avoided phone calls, letters, appointments. She said she assumed she would always get in trouble. That fear had guided too many of her choices. Now, she said, she handled things differently. She faced them, not without fear, but without panic. That difference mattered. I told her something honestly. I told her that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision not to let fear decide for you. She nodded like the words settled somewhere important. Before court began, she thanked me again and stepped back. As she walked away, I noticed something familiar. She walked with her head up. That may seem small, but it isn't. Body language tells the truth long before words do. That morning in court, I found myself more aware than usual, more attentive to hesitation, more patient with pauses. Once you witness how fear softens under kindness, you don't forget it. During one case, a middle-aged man stood before me clearly flustered. His paperwork was out of order. He apologized repeatedly. Instead of correcting him sharply, I guided him calmly. I watched his shoulders relax. I watched his voice steady. The pattern repeated. Kindness, when practiced consistently, becomes a language people recognize. Later that week, I received an email forwarded from the clerk's office. It was from the young woman again. This time it was short. She wrote that she had handled a difficult situation at work without shutting down. She wrote that she smiled instead of panicking. She wrote that it worked. I read that email twice. Then I sat quietly for a moment. The smallest suggestions can sometimes become anchors for people. That word had become an anchor for her. I thought about how often people carry fear without ever naming it. They live their lives bracing for something bad to happen. And when it does, even something small, it confirms everything they feared. That day in court, her fear didn't get confirmed. It got interrupted. At home, my wife and I talked again about the story. She said it was amazing how one calm interaction could undo years of anxiety. I told her anxiety isn't logical. It responds to safety, not arguments. As weeks turned into months, I stopped hearing from her. That's usually a good sign. It means life is moving forward without the need to look back. But she stayed with me nonetheless. One afternoon, I was sitting in my chambers when I noticed the smile reflection in the glass of a framed certificate on the wall. I laughed quietly at myself. That word had followed me longer than I expected. I realized something important. People don't always need answers. They need reassurance that they're not in danger for being imperfect. That understanding changed how I approached my work. Not the law itself, but the delivery, tone, pace, presence. Those things matter as much as outcomes. A few days later, another nervous driver stood before me. A young woman this time, just like her, hands shaking, voice barely steady. I recognized the fear instantly. I leaned forward and said calmly, "Take your time." I watched her breathe. I watched her relax. And without even planning it, I said it again. I said, "Smile." She looked surprised. Then she smiled, just a little. And the room softened again. I realized then that this wasn't just one story. It was a lesson I would carry forward for the rest of my time on the bench. Authority doesn't have to intimidate to be effective. Calm is contagious. Kindness is grounding. And reassurance can change a life's direction. I thought again about that first young woman, standing there through tears, convinced she was failing, and I smiled to myself, knowing how far she had come. I knew this story still had one final chapter left, because the true impact of kindness is often revealed much later when you least expect it. The next part of this story unfolded quietly, without ceremony, the way real change often does. It wasn't marked by applause or attention. It came through observation, reflection, and one unexpected moment that reminded me just how far that young woman had come. Several months had passed since I first met her. Court moved the way it always does. New cases, new faces, familiar tension. But every so often, I would notice someone in the gallery who wasn't there because they had to be. They were there because they wanted to understand. And one morning I noticed her again. She was sitting near the back, hands folded neatly, posture relaxed. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't avoiding eye contact. She was simply watching, learning. That told me everything I needed to know. During a pause in the docket, I asked Christina quietly if she knew why the young woman was there. Christina told me she had asked if she could observe court that morning before heading to work. She said she wanted to see how things worked from the other side, now that she wasn't afraid of it anymore. That stayed with me. Fear keeps people away from understanding. Confidence invites curiosity. Watching her sit there calmly felt like witnessing the final stage of a transformation that started with one small moment. Later that day, after court ended, she waited patiently near the aisle. When the room cleared, she approached the bench. There was no hesitation this time, no shaking hands, no rushing apologies, just respect. She told me she didn't want to take much time. She said she just wanted me to know something important. She said that after that day in court, she began practicing something simple whenever she felt overwhelmed. She paused, she breathed, and she smiled. She said it sounded silly when she first thought about it, but she realized something. Smiling reminded her that she wasn't in danger, that she wasn't a child being punished, that she was an adult who could handle difficult moments. Hearing that stopped me for a moment. She said she had started using that pause at work in conversations, even while driving. She said it helped her respond instead of react. That difference had changed how people responded to her, too. I told her something honestly. I told her that what she had learned wasn't about smiling. It was about regaining control of her body and mind in moments of fear. Smiling was just the doorway. She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. She told me something else. She said that before that day, she avoided any situation where she might be judged. Now, she said, she didn't avoid them. She faced them calmly. She said she still felt nervous sometimes, but the panic didn't take over anymore. That mattered more than any legal outcome. I watched her walk out of the courtroom that day with steady steps, and I realized something important. Authority didn't change her. Respect did. Safety did. Being seen did. That evening I drove home thinking about how many people walk through life bracing for judgment, bracing for rejection, bracing for confirmation of their worst fears, and how rarely those fears are interrupted. At home, my wife noticed I was quieter than usual. I told her about seeing the young woman again. I told her how different she seemed, how grounded, how calm. She smiled and said something simple. She said sometimes people just need one moment where fear doesn't win. She was right. The next week, something else happened that brought this story even closer to my heart. A young driver stood before me, visibly nervous, hands shaking just like hers had months earlier. The resemblance was impossible to miss. Without thinking, I slowed everything down. I spoke calmly. I reminded them to breathe. And when the moment was right, I said it again. I said, "Smile." And just like before, something shifted. The fear loosened, the tension softened, the explanation came more clearly. I watched confidence return piece by piece. That's when it hit me fully. This wasn't just a one-time interaction. It was a lesson that would outlive that single case. It would shape how I approach people for the rest of my career. After more than 40 years on this bench, I've learned that people don't come to court just for rulings. They come carrying stories, fears, and expectations shaped long before they ever walk through the door. That young woman walked in expecting to be judged. She walked out remembering kindness. I thought about how differently her story could have gone, how easily fear could have been reinforced instead of relieved, how a sharp tone or rushed decision could have confirmed everything she feared about authority. Instead, one calm moment changed her direction. As time went on, I stopped seeing her entirely, and that's okay. That's how it should be. Court isn't meant to be a recurring place for growth. It's meant to be a moment people pass through and leave stronger. But I never forgot her. Every time someone stood before me with shaking hands or tearful eyes, I remembered that smile. I remembered how fragile people can feel in moments of authority. And I remembered the responsibility that comes with that power. I realized something deeply important. Justice isn't only about outcomes. It's about experience. It's about how people feel walking out of the room. That realization stayed with me, and I knew that the final chapter of this story wasn't about her anymore. It was about what that moment taught me. The final chapter of this story didn't arrive with a dramatic moment in court or a ruling that made headlines. It arrived quietly, the way the most lasting lessons usually do. It arrived as understanding. One afternoon, long after that young woman had stopped appearing in my courtroom, I found myself sitting alone after court had ended. The benches were empty. The room was quiet. I removed my robe and rested it carefully on the chair beside me. I always take a moment like that when something stays with me. I thought about her first steps toward the podium, the shaking hands, the tears she tried so hard to hide. I thought about how small she must have felt standing there, convinced she was about to be judged. And I thought about how close she came to leaving, confirmed in her worst fears. Instead, she left smiling. That word stayed with me longer than I ever expected, not because it was clever, but because it reminded me how powerful small moments can be when someone is overwhelmed. Fear doesn't need to be defeated forcefully. Sometimes it just needs to be acknowledged. I've learned that authority has a strange effect on people. It can shrink them. It can make them feel like children again, waiting to be corrected. And when that happens, logic doesn't help. Rules don't comfort. Only reassurance does. That young woman didn't need a lecture. She didn't need a warning. She needed permission to breathe. As the weeks went on, I noticed how that lesson stayed with me. I spoke more slowly. I paused more often. I watched faces instead of papers, and I saw it again and again. When people felt safe, they spoke honestly. When they felt calm, they listened. One morning, a nervous driver stood before me, hands trembling just like hers had. Without thinking, I leaned forward and said calmly, "Take your time." I watched their breathing slow. I watched their shoulders drop. That moment felt familiar. Another day, a young woman apologized repeatedly just for speaking. I told her she didn't need to apologize for existing. I saw the relief wash over her face. That relief never gets old. I realized something important. People don't remember fines. They don't remember case numbers. They remember how they were treated when they were vulnerable. That young woman went on with her life. I don't know all the details, and I don't need to. I know enough. She learned she could face intimidating moments without falling apart. She learned she wasn't weak for being nervous. She learned that authority doesn't always mean harm. And I learned something too. After more than 40 years on this bench, I've learned that justice isn't always about enforcing the law as tightly as possible. It's about applying it wisely. It's about recognizing when someone needs guidance instead of punishment. That word smile wasn't about dismissing her fear. It was about grounding her in the present. It was about reminding her she was safe enough to stand there, safe enough to explain herself, safe enough to be human. People ask me sometimes how I've stayed on this bench for so long without becoming hardened. The truth is, moments like this are why. When you see how a small act of kindness can change someone's day, sometimes even their direction, it keeps you connected. I think about my father often. He used to tell me that respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Standing on this bench, I've seen how true that is. When people feel respected, they rise to it. That young woman rose to it and rose. I still see nervous drivers every day. I still see shaking hands and tearful eyes. And every time I do, I remember her. I remember how close fear came to winning that day and how easily it was interrupted. The law gives judges authority, but humanity gives that authority meaning. As I walked out of the courtroom that afternoon, I felt grateful. Grateful that after all these years, I could still learn something new. Grateful that kindness still works. Grateful that sometimes changing someone's day doesn't require a ruling at all. It just requires noticing. I'm Frank Caprio. I've spent more than 4 decades on this bench because I believe something simple. Justice should never make people feel smaller. It should steady them. It should remind them that they matter. And if one calm word can help someone stand a little taller when they're afraid, then that's justice doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Thank you for listening to this story.